My name is Danny Fenton and I'm an aeromodeller and an engineer. Join me on a fascinating journey where I show you some of the techniques used in scale aeromodelling. I decided to do a bit of detailing as a bit of a busman's holiday from what I have been doing. So I thought I'd make the rudder trim tab. And you can just about see it on the edge of that picture there. It's a piece of metal that is screwed onto the trailing edge of the rudder, and then there's fabric over the top. And one of the distinguishing features about the little thing is that it has lots and lots of holes drilled in a line so that it's very easy to bend. Now it's not meant to be bent more than once or twice maybe, you know, and it's done when the airframe is originally test flown and it's to set the amount of rudder trim that is needed. So I did all the holes on the mill, and to get the spacing an equal distance. So what I did was I moved the feed one whole revolution and then drilled another revolution drilled. So every revolution I drilled a hole. And then for the larger holes, or the further spaced holes, I drilled those just by freehand, and you'll notice there's a much bigger gap between that first and that second one, and that is how my original is. Not all, but my prototype has a bigger spacing there between those bolts, and there's the right number. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add glue blobs to each of these to simulate the screws. And what I'm going to use is Titebond Ultimate. It just happens to be the glue that I find forms the nicest round rivets when it dries. If you use something like Deluxe Materials aliphatic or superphatic, you'll find that when that shrinks, it shrinks back and you'll get very nice pop rivets because you've got a little dimple in the top. Anyway, keep that note in mind, because when we come to do the pop rivets, because there are some on the Chipmunk, then we'll be using the aliphatic resin, superphatic, to do that. So what I've got in here is Titebond Ultimate. I've got a green syringe needle that is cut to be absolutely 90 degrees. Well, it doesn't have to be absolutely, but when you get a syringe, it's actually got a point on it, and it's done by the tube being cut at an angle, at a chamfer, and quite a steep angle. You can't use that for riveting. So what you need to do is use the grinder and cut it perpendicular. Okay, and that will give you the right size. Now, depending on the colour of the syringe tip, I believe this is how it works. The colour denotes how big the syringe is. And I've no idea how big a green one is, but it's the green one that I use. It gives me the right sort of size blobs. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a blob to every one of those holes. I was originally going to use some plastic simulated rivets, but I can't get any that small. So we're going to go with the glue blobs, if I can get them to work. So I'm just feeding it now just to get the thing going. And the glue is starting to appear. Water's coming out first, which is good. There's water. And there we have the glue blobs coming out. I don't know whether you can see that. Okay. So here we go. Keep it clean. Keep wiping it on your finger. Try not to touch the surface with the needle. You want to touch the surface with the glue blob. So let the blob form on the end of the needle, and when it's the right size, touch the blob onto the surface. And if you're not happy with one, just wipe it off. It takes a bit of practice to get the blobs the same size. So what I tend to do is do a row, take a look, and then we'll decide whether to lose them or not. That one there is a little bit small, so we'll just add a bit to it. Now he's about right, so that'll do. So then you just wipe the needle clean, take the needle off the end of the bottle. I have another bottle full of water that I just push on, and I squeeze it to get all the glue out until it runs clear. Paper towel just to wipe it off, and again I keep running it till the fluid is clear. That needle is then is not blocked. But what you then need to do is just make sure the inside of the syringe needle head is clear too. And I do that with a kitchen bud, a bud, an earbud or whatever you want to call them. And I just whack it in there and give it a stir. That gets that sort of clean. Put the end on again. I'm just going to double check. We've got clear water coming out. Then the needle is clean. Everything is ready for the next time I want to use it. It's all set up and ready to go. I also have a rather funky pin with a plastic head on it, which is quite useful. And that actually fits, if my eyesight will let me do it, inside the needle, syringe needle. And that also keeps it clean. So it's ready again for next time you want to use it straight away. All right, so we'll let those blobs dry completely. It'll probably take about 20 minutes. When they're clear, then they've dried. And I'm noticing that one's a little bit smaller than the other. Oh, anyway, we won't worry about it too much because this is now going to get covered in the rib tape. So I'll get some rib tape and we'll iron it on over the top of that once this is really dry. Well, as you can see, I'm not particularly keen to get back to sanding stuff and doing things like that. I thought what I'd do for a while, as a sort of a break from all the other stuff, was I'd take a look at the elevator trim tabs. So what I've done is I've taken some 0.3 lithoplate, which is the thicker version of the lithoplate, and I've made these two, let's see if I can pick them up, two small triangles of lithoplate. And all I've done is I've cut them out with scissors. I know I don't like using scissors for larger pieces, but for small bits it's all right. And then I've traced one onto the other and then made them so they're identical, and then I drilled some holes. So what I'm going to do now is just bend them to put a 90-degree angle in them, and they go somewhere around here on the elevator trim tab. So what I'll do now is I'll just bend those. And what I'm going to use to bend it is one of the dapping blocks that I've got. Yeah, I've shown you these before, but it's a very simple way of bending them. Let's do them this way. So let's just make sure both sides of this is clean, because they're a lot easier to clean the print off of them, which they're not, you see. They're a lot easier to clean up before you bend them. In fact, they're a lot easier to clean before you even cut them out. But I haven't done that, so I'm not going to teach you how to use sandpaper as I did in that last video. Sorry about that, I didn't mean to be condescending. Right, so where were we? We were going to bend something. Can't pick them up, never mind, bend them. So we'll put that one across the top of the block, and I'll get it so that I'm really happy that it is perpendicular and it is right in the middle of that little notch there. I'll hold it tight and then bend it around the edge. Oops, put a bit of pressure on there at that point. So there we have our 90-degree bent piece, and then I'll do the other one as well. I'll use the same technique and line it up using the same little notch if I can. Right there. As you can see, that gets you a perfect 90-degree bend, and all the edges are nice. So that's those two. Where these are going to go is right on this elevator tab. Just going to get something to rest the elevator on, because I don't like it being on the desk like that. Okay, I know it should be around about 15 mils from the back of the elevator to the base of the trim tab. So it should be about there, and 50 mil from the rear to the hole where the actuating cable comes out. So what I'm going to do is position this on there like that, and that's roughly how we're going to have it. And then I'm going to make 2 small holes. This is incredibly fiddly. Do you know what I might do? I think I might actually glue that on there now. And I'm just going to tack it on. So there it's tacked on. Okay, so there we have it tacked onto the elevator trim. Now what I'm going to do, I was going to take this this tool with the drill bit in, and it's the same one that I used to make the hole in the litho plate. And I'm going to go right through the tab, trying to keep it as vertical as I can. This elevator trim tab has already been glassed. It's made out of balsa. It's actually made out of 2 laminations of balsa with a 64th ply core, so that the trailing edge is really sharp and tough. But then the bulk of it is done with balsa, and then the whole lot's been glassed. So there we are. Those holes go right through. Now you're probably all the same as me, and you've got lots of boxes and bits and pieces of stuff. But what I've got here is a box of what I call, and the box is just labelled, tiny screws. And whenever I see some that look interesting, I'll buy them. These are probably some of the tiniest screws you'll ever see. These are 16 BA, and they're about 0.8 of a millimetre, less than that, maybe half a millimetre, and they're threaded. And I've got nuts and bolts to go with these. So what I'm going to use for this, I think, is probably, well, I'm looking at the 14 BAs. I'm just going to have a look and see what else I've got in here. Here are the nuts that go with those 16 BA screws. Ridiculous, isn't it? I don't know who made those, and I don't know where I got them from, but I stumbled across some website somewhere and they were selling them. I thought, oh, got to have some of those. So I did. Wonder whether this would be a good size. These are 12 BA, and looking at the photographs, I think that might be a good size. Whether they're actually long enough to go right through, I think they probably are. So I'm going to use 2 Macclesfield models is where they came from. I've written Mac on the bag. It's always a good idea when you buy some stuff that maybe is a bit obscure, right on the bag where you got them from. Always a good idea. Right, so hopefully they will go through that hole. Now I don't have any washers, so obviously on the full size there are washers and stuff. But let's see if we can get that to go right through. There we go. Can't feel it on, oh, I can just feel it on the other side. Okay, well that's nice because it's actually tapped. I could feel it biting, so that's actually done its job without a nut and bolt on the other end, or without any screws or anything, without any fasteners on the other end. So that's quite good. So you'll see why in a minute. That one's gone through nicely as well. I'm sure I could just push and it would go right through, but if I thread it, then it bites a little, and that's nice. And that one's just going, oh no, it's tightening up as well. So there we've got 2 12 BA screws holding that together. If we flip it over, you can just about see where our screws were, and we could have done with just fractionally longer, to be honest. And with a bit of luck, they'll go straight into that, and we'll be able to put the bracket on the other side. Now the interesting thing on the Chipmunk is this bracket isn't handed. Now normally you'd think it would be, but it isn't. So the actual connecting part is closer to the centre of the fuselage on one side than the other, because they're both the same. I'm going to make that hole just slightly bigger. I don't think I made the holes perfectly vertical. Looks right, but obviously isn't. So I'm just going to open these holes up a fraction with the next size drill up. There we go. Or a little bit of CA, thin CA. So there we have that one on. And if we flip it over, we also have the other one on. Okay. Now the way the trim works on these, it's a pull. This picture shows what we're trying to replicate here. You can see the horn we've got here. This is not my subject aircraft, and on mine the horn is, or the arm is thicker, or a little bit wider at the base than this one's quite tall and thin. So you've got to look at your subject aircraft quite closely. But this area is the same, and it's a little angled bracket with a faceplate on it, and then there's a tube coming out of the tailplane. So we're going to try and replicate that. And I've taken my drawing, and I know that the distance from there to there puts the hole here. That rear edge is that line there. So we need to make a hole here, and we need to find a suitable tube. For this sort of thing, you would normally look at, or you might think you would look at metal tubing or aluminium tubing or something like that. But when you get down this small and this thinner diameter, you might want to look at some of this very thin tubing that you can get from, I can't remember the name of the company now. Let me just, Hyperflight, that's the name of them. And they do this PTFE tubing in various diameters, including some really fine stuff. And you can get wire to go with it. And this is kind of like a stainless wire, but it's fairly stiff. And you can make a really nice light Bowden cable setup. It's great for indoor models. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find something that I think is going to be a suitable size for this tube as it's coming out of the wing. I think I'll probably go for this 14. I don't know what the number 14 means, whether it's 1.4 or what, but I want something smaller than that. Well, as I say, I didn't want to use brass or metal. I've actually found a brass tube that is, I think, is a perfect size for that. And I might be able to radius the end to match the photo as well. So I'm going to use a little bit of brass tube. I'm going for the brass tube. What I did was I put the tube in the end of the drill just to give it a bit of a spin. Now I'm going to make a hole in my elevator, and then the brass tube goes in. It will go in, and it needs to be forced in, which is exactly what I want. It needs to be angled, and there's balsa underneath, so there we go. What I'm going to use to align it, this is a G string, a guitar G string. I'm just going to angle it until it lines up with the hole in the arm. Then I'm going to wick in some CA. And I'm going to trim this to length. Now what we need to do is try to make this little metal plate that keeps it in place. Now I'm not sure how I'm going to do that because it's very fine. I'll try and do it in lithe plate. So here's the small bracket that I've made. You can see, quite fiddly, but I love this sort of stuff. If we thread it over the guitar string and then slide it down into position just there. Now it needs that bend to be slightly less than vertical. So I'm going to bend it a little bit, and then we'll thread it back on again. And there it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick that just there, like that. And then when it's dry, I'll fold this bit down at the front so that it's flush. Bit of activator. So I'm just going to press on this bit here and hope that it bends flat. And there we go. So now what we have to do is we have to replicate the nut and bolt that is on the end that traps that wire. And I think what I'll actually use is a nut and bolt. I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it. So going back into my nut and bolt bag, I've got those 12 BAs again. We've got some 14 BAs. Let's have a rummage. That's the 12 BAs we used earlier. Let's go with the 12 BAs and I'll see if I can find a nut and bolt to go with it, or some nuts to go with it. Well, there's those, they've got nuts. Let's go with these. I think these are 12s. But they'll need to be cut a little bit shorter. So if we put the bolt through one side, let's see, which way does it go? The nut is on the outside. So if we go through like that, when you get as old and as cranky as me, and your fingers don't work quite as well as they used to, one of the real problems when you're doing detailing is actually getting things to, or holding very tiny things. This is a cocktail bamboo type stick, or a skewer, and on the end I've just put a blob of blue tack. It's actually yellow in this case, but it's blue tack nonetheless, and I'm just going to use it to pick up the screw or the nut and use that to thread it on the end. This might take a few efforts. There we go, I said it right. My hands are definitely shaking more than they ever used to when I was younger. And there we go. And there we go, and that's trapped the wire as well, which is exactly what I wanted to do. That should lock the nuts and bolts. Now I'm just wicking the excess glue off, because when you put paint on it, if the glue is dried in the lump, the paint will go to the lump. It won't look right. Now what we have to do is we have to lose the end of that thread because it's too long. And this is where you can break things, because the amount of force that you need to cut that can sometimes break all the surrounding areas. So, but in this case we got away with it. And there we go. I don't know whether you think that's a pretty good resemblance or not, but I'm going to add a couple of blobs of glue on there just to look like nuts and bolts. Here we go. And they're the two blobs. This is the end result. You can see, just lift the elevator up so it's out of shadow. You can see it's come out quite well. I'm really quite pleased with that. If we look at the rudder trim is all nice and neatly done. And I've put the glue dots on and also the pinked tape along the edge. And also if we go underneath, you can see that it's complete on the underside as well. If I can get the thing to focus, there we go. So the pull is done on both surfaces, or, you know, the top and the bottom. And there we have it. So the rear end is starting to look very good. Getting very close now to paint. If you've enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.